and stand and let's worship together this morning.
Who breaks the power of sin and darkness, whose love is mighty and so much stronger, the King of glory, the King above all kings. Who shakes the whole earth with holy thunder, who leaves us breathless in awe and wonder, the King of glory, the King above all kings. Yeah, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I say for all that you've done for me. Who brings our chaos back into order? Who makes the orphan a son and daughter? The King of glory, the King of glory, who rules the nations with truth and justice, shines like the sun in all of its brilliance. The King of glory, the King above all kings. Yeah, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I say for all that you've done for me. And worthy is the Lamb who was slain, worthy is the King who conquered the grave, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, worthy is the King who conquered the grave, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, worthy is the King who conquered the grave, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, worthy, worthy, worthy. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I say for all that you've done for me. It wasn't for nothing that you shed your blood, so I'm gonna live like my shame is gone. I won't be shackled to the way I was. I'm gonna live like my chains are gone, gone. Now my sin is dead and gone, and I sing hallelujah.
gonna shout like the battle's won. Fall back, devil, cause your time is up. I'm gonna live like the stone is gone, gone. Now my sin is dead and gone, and I sing hallelujah. Done, done. He is risen, it is done, and I sing hallelujah. How great the power of the blood. Oh, oh, oh. In Christ I'm the righteousness of God. Oh, sing how great the power of the blood. In Christ I'm the righteousness of God.
Let your glory fall. Let your glory fall on us. Let your glory fall. Let your glory fall. Let your glory fall on us. Spirit of God, come like the dawn. Open the heavens on us. We want to know you. We want to know you. Spirit of God, come like the dawn. Open the heavens on us. We want to know you. We want to know you. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. There's a table that you've prepared
I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. A man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together. Every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you.
Let's pray together. God, that is true. There's nothing better than you. Everything else that we run to try and satisfy our greatest desires, those are just empty wells. they leave us thirstier than when we came to begin with. So right now, we want to ask that you would forgive us for going to those empty wells. We know that you alone satisfy all our greatest desires. You are the one our hearts were made for. We're made to worship you, to love you, to know you, and to be known by you. And in your great love for us, you did come to find us. You're the only one who can rescue us. You're the only one who can bring our dead bones back to life. The only one who can turn graves into gardens. Would you do that in our hearts, in our lives? Would we find our rest and satisfaction in you alone? Thank you for all you've done for us. We pray all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Good morning, Horizons. Why don't you turn around and wander around and say hello to some folks? All right. Well, good morning, everybody. How are y'all? Y'all doing all right today? Yeah? Good Sunday morning, rainy, and did y'all get hit by that storm last night? Yeah? I was with my dog outside, and, he was getting pelted with rain, I was getting pelted with rain, and he decided he didn't want to, go to the bathroom, he was like, I don't know if he's torturing me or what, he kept me outside in the rain, the power went off, he was crying all night. It was a lot of fun, so, anyway, if we haven't met yet, my name is Josiah. I'm the assistant campus pastor here at our Lost Creek campus. We're so glad that you were here worshiping with us this morning. If you are new, we're especially glad that you are here. And at the end of the service, my father, Pastor Quint, is going to be delivering the message today. And at the end of the service, he'd love to meet you if you're new, introduce himself, get to know you a little bit, show you how you can get connected here at the church. And he will give you a Lysoled gift that you can take home today. So if you're new, he'd love to meet you over there, where the welcome banner is at the end of the service, all right? And for the old-timers among us, we are still doing a touch-free, paper-free service, so we encourage you to use our app, the Horizons Church app, which you can download on the App Store, the Google Play Store. We've got all of our in-service tools there for your benefit and convenience. And if you're old school like me and you don't like apps, you can just always bring a notebook and a pencil. That's what I like to do. But that app is available for your convenience, and you got all the normal tools in there. All right, including our giving. We're very grateful for your continued financial generosity, without which we would be unable to do all the awesome ministry that we do here at the church. So if you'd like to give, you can do so in the app, or you can utilize any of the 4 methods that are up on the screen. And I know that I say every week that, or Lucas says every week that, we're able to do awesome ministry because of your gifts, which doesn't just include the stuff that we do here on the weekends. We're not just making this up. In fact, this past week, we were able to partner with a ministry called Vision Appalachia. An old friend of Steve Felder's runs that ministry. And they're working down in Clay County in the South with some really impoverished folks, some people who have hit on some hard times. And because of your generosity, we were able to pack 50 boxes of food, supplies, and we were able to take that down to the folks at Vision Appalachia, and they were able to help out the folks in Clay County. And in fact, it was the Kearns community group. It wasn't even the pastors who ended up taking care of that. A community group here ended up packing those boxes and contributing to that. So you all are doing awesome ministry. Your gifts made that possible. So thank you so much for giving. It's really, really appreciated, not just by us, but by folks down in Clay County who will never know your names, but will be feeling the benefit of your generosity. So thank you for that. Other than that, we're launching a new series today on the spiritual power of habits called Rhythms. My father, Pastor Quint, will be up to kick off that series after one brief video announcement from Pastor Kelly. So take a look at the big screens, and he will be up to kick off this new series.
Hi, moms and dads. If your little ones find it difficult to remain quiet in today's worship service, please be courteous to those around you and take advantage of our cry rooms located in the back of the sanctuary. If the cry rooms are occupied, we have tables and sofas for family viewing in our cafe. Either way, you'll be able to see and hear everything, and your child will enjoy the extra freedom. And now, here's our lead pastor, Quint Pitts.
So let's welcome in those of you worshiping with us at other campuses around West Virginia. Thank you guys for being here today. And those of you who are watching online at our live stream, thank you guys for being with us today. Any of you guys got any bad habits? Any bad habits? Mike Perry, you're the only one willing to admit it. Thank you, sir. Okay, Tom, thank you. Yeah, well, we all have bad habits, right? Everybody picks those up along the way. When I was a kid, my mom had me convinced that just biting my fingernails was going to kill me. I was going to die, go blind, or my teeth were going to rot out of my head, just from biting fingernails. Turns out that was a bit of an exaggeration from my mom. So biting fingernails, probably not a lot of consequences of that, but there are some bad habits that do have consequences, right? I mean, think about if you decide to overspend a lot. That's a bad habit, right? You spend more money than you actually are bringing in. That's a bad habit that can really put some serious consequences into your life. Abusing alcohol, abusing drugs, that's a bad habit that can ruin relationships and wreck your life for sure. It maybe even destroy your life if you aren't able to get control of that. But even the most innocent bad habits that are left unchecked, that can prevent me from becoming the kind of man I want to be, right? That can prevent you from becoming the kind of woman that you want to be. I remember, I'm going to tell you a little inside baseball, okay? And you can't throw stones at me. We're in church and you have to love me. It's a rule. All right? In the mid-'90s, I started smoking cigars. I wasn't a pastor at that time, and I thought I could get away with it, right? So I started smoking cigars, and I really started enjoying these cigars way too much, And I am not of the opinion that cigar smoking is sin, okay? If you do smoke cigars, I'm not busting your chops. But here's what happened to me. I started getting controlled by the cigars. I started rushing through my meals so I could get to the cigar, And I just started thinking to myself one day, Pitts, it's probably not a good idea that this thing has so much control over you, right? So anyway, that was a bad habit that I thought was probably not, it's not going to kill anybody, I don't think, I know there's people who say you shouldn't touch tobacco. I'm not of that opinion, but if you are of that opinion, I'm fine with what you think, but I just felt like I couldn't let it keep controlling my life, and it was controlling my life, and it's as expensive as drugs if you have a good cigar, right? So anyway, I just felt like I needed to get rid of that because it was preventing me from becoming the kind of man I wanted to be. So what can we do about this? If we do have some bad habits and we're trying to get rid of them, is there anything that we can do? Can anything be done to change a habit that's maybe controlling my life? Even something kind of innocent like smoking cigars. I'm going to illustrate it this way, and if you've been around Horizons for a while, you've heard me do this before, so just bear with me. But I think this beautifully illustrates what I'm going to try to talk about today, okay? Anybody have any fruit trees in your yard? Any fruit trees? Bob, what kind of fruit tree you got? Pear tree. And an apple tree. When I was a kid, we had an apple tree. I think that's an apple tree there. When I was a kid, we had an apple tree in our yard. And Bob, did you ever walk out and see your apple tree? Let's pretend I'm the apple tree, all right? And these are my limbs, okay? Did you ever see the apple tree doing one of these numbers? And there's an apple. Did you ever see that? Me neither. If you ever see it, I want to come over and film it, okay? We'll have a great story to tell. Now, apple trees don't struggle to produce apples, right? Pear trees don't struggle to produce pears, right? That's not a struggle for the apple tree. An apple tree, what it does, it produces apples, right? Quite naturally, there's no grunting and groaning, and there's no effort, and there's no pushing and pulling. It's just, there's an apple. Quite naturally. So there's no struggle for the apple tree to produce apples. But, apple trees do struggle. Pear trees do struggle. But their struggle is unseen. Their struggle is unheard. And when I first noticed this struggle, when I was a young man of 19 years old, all right, I'm going to go back. When I was 7 years old, I helped my father pour a concrete sidewalk. Definition of help there was I was around. When you're 7 years old, you're not really helping your dad pour concrete sidewalk. But I remember this event very clearly because it was the first time I ever saw one of those big honking cement trucks, and I was excited about that day. And the cement truck came and poured the cement down, and we raked it into our sidewalk forms, and we even had a concrete porch. We felt like we were the cool kids on the block, We had a concrete sidewalk. This was 1971. Fast forward 12 years, I'm 19 years old. I come back from college, and I noticed that this beautiful sidewalk that I had helped my dad pour 12 years ago is starting to crack. There's a big honking crack right down the middle of it. And I could see that it was actually buckling up from underneath. Guess what happened? That apple tree, it was about 25 feet away, the roots had grown underneath of the concrete and were breaking up and busting up the concrete. So apple trees struggle. They don't struggle to produce fruit. They don't struggle to produce apples. But apple trees struggle to get their roots into the life-giving energies of soil and water. An apple tree has to have two things in order to produce apples. It has to have soil and it has to have water. It has to have both and not one or the other. If you put an apple tree into the middle of a river, it ain't going to produce apples, right? If all it has is water and doesn't have soil, it's not going to produce apples. If you put an apple tree in the middle of a soil, but there's no water around and the soil is lifeless, guess what? The apple tree will be lifeless too. So that apple tree will move its roots. It will plow through rocks. It'll plow through concrete sidewalks if it has to in order to get to water and soil. Now, you and I aren't a whole lot different from that. The Bible uses all kinds of stories and illustrations. Jesus himself told parables where he compared us to these fruit-producing plants. And he says that in order for us to produce the kind of things we want in our life, in order for us to become the kind of man we want to be, the kind of woman we want to be, we've got to get our roots, the roots of our soul, into the life-giving energies of water and soil. What is the equivalent of water and soil for those of us who are followers of Jesus and we're wanting to live our lives a certain way and we're wanting to produce certain habits and we're wanting to kick certain habits? What is the equivalent of water and soil for us? There are two things. I'm going to talk about them today. That's a setup for our series today. We're starting a new series called Rhythms. We're talking about spiritual habits, okay? So I'm going to talk to you about this first thing, this first source of energy for us. And some of you are going to think I'm a heretic for bringing this up. I know you are. But you're going to be tempted to get up and walk away. You're going to be tempted to get up and leave the room. You're going to be tempted to get up and click off of the live stream. Hear me out, okay? Hear me out. Don't run off. Don't tune out. Hear me out, because I think this is really important. In order for us to live the kind of life that we want to live, to become the kind of men and women that we want to become, we've got to figure out how life works. There is a way that life works, and there's a way that life doesn't work. The way life works is what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk a little bit about how life doesn't work, too. It's the wisdom of the Scriptures. Tells us there are natural laws, right? Gravity is a law. Thermodynamics is a law. Inertia is a law. Cause and effect, those are natural laws that tell us how life works. Well, the kingdom of God is very similar in that. There are laws that tell us how life works in the kingdom of God. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In order for us to become the kind of men and women we want to be, there's a process. We have to agree with a process that works. And that is the deep wisdom of the Scripture. So the first source of energy for us to produce the kind of life we want to naturally, the kind of fruit we want to produce naturally, we as Christians should produce fruit naturally, just like a tree, but we have a struggle, and that is we've got to get our roots, the soul of our roots, into the life-giving energies of, guess what? Number one, paying attention to the deepest desires of my heart energizes my soul. The deepest desires. I know we Christians don't like to talk about desire unless it's the negative, right? We Christians usually, we're afraid of desire. We're terrified of desire because desire might take us someplace we want to go, but we don't want to go. But here's what I want to ask you. When was the last time you felt it? When was the last time you felt the deepest desire of your own heart? When was the last time you were in communion with the deepest desire of your heart? When was the last time you noticed the deepest desire of your heart? You're longing for love. You're longing to love and be loved. You're longing for God. You're longing to live your life as you were meant to live in Jesus Christ. If you're truly going to find life, if you're going to become the kind of person you want to be, you cannot just rush past that question. You can't. Ruth Barton says it this way. She said, "It may be the most important question you ever ask." This question about the deepest desires of your heart. But this is hard, I know, because in religious circles, we are much more accustomed to silencing our desire, distancing ourselves from it, because we're suspicious and afraid of its power. We are afraid of the power of our desires, aren't we? We've been kind of conditioned by that. By the church. We ask ourselves, aren't my desires shot through with human deception? Aren't my desires shot through with sinful urges? What if my desires lead me to a place that I don't want to go? What if they overpower me? What if I get in touch with my desires and then I can't make those desires happen? I can't make them come true. What will I do then? Here's what I know. If I ignore these deepest desires of my heart, two things happen. If I ignore the deepest desires of my heart, those deep desires in my heart, they go to sleep. They go to sleep. They don't force their attention upon us in that sense. They just go to sleep. And when the deepest desires of my heart go to sleep, guess what happens to me as a man? I go to resignation. I go to cynicism. I start walking around, there's no way I can change. There's really not any source of joy for me anymore. There's really not any source of life for me anymore. I'm just kind of going to go through life kind of as an automaton. I'm going to go through life kind of as a machine. I'm not going to feel things. We go to resignation and cynicism if we don't pay attention to these desires and they fall asleep. That's one thing that happens. The second thing that happens is these desires will fall asleep, but they also go underground. And when these desires go underground, they come out sideways. They come out in the form of addictions. They come out in the form of rage and anger. So these things, we've got to pay attention to them, I think. Our problem as humans isn't that we don't have desires. The problem as humans isn't that we do have desires. Our problem as humans is we settle too quickly for chump change desires. We settle too quickly for dead-end desires. C.S. Lewis famously said, we are far too easily pleased, right? We are far too easily pleased. We go to these, my big desire in life is to get a new truck. Really? I mean, that's a nice desire, but is it the deepest desire? Is that the big thing in your life? I'm going to get a new truck? We settle for that, though, don't we? We settle for that because we have been kind of conditioned to not go towards our deepest desires. These are some of the deepest questions of the human soul, and they really do defy simplistic answers. I guess we shouldn't be surprised when we look at the Bible and we look at the stories in the Bible, especially when you look at Jesus. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that one of the things that Jesus does, and I think it's a beautiful thing, is that he asks people questions that force them to articulate their desires. Have you ever gone through the Gospels and this is a nice exercise if you ever want to do just a kind of interesting little Bible study. Go through the Gospels and underline every place where Jesus said, "What do you want? What do you want me to do for you?" He's asking these people that he's ministering to, he's asking them to get in touch with their deepest desires and to articulate those deepest desires right there in his presence. One of the examples of that is in Mark chapter 10, if you got your Bible. Mark chapter 10. In this story takes place just about a week before Jesus' arrest and crucifixion. He's traveling to Jerusalem along with almost everybody else in Israel. He's traveling to Jerusalem, and the roads are crowded. Everybody's heading for Jerusalem for the Feast of Passover, and Jesus and his entourage coming through Jericho. And Jericho is one of those cities that people stop and they stay for a while on their road to Jerusalem, and he's in a very busy place. The roads are packed out with people heading for Jerusalem and the Passover. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of busyness. There's just a lot of stuff going on. And somehow, over the din and the busyness and the kind of chaos in the city of Jerusalem that day, or in the city of Jericho that day, Jesus hears a man shouting, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, I really want to see the instant replay in heaven when we get to heaven. I want to see it. Because I'm thinking, how in the world did Jesus hear this guy over all the noise and bustle of that busy city that day? But he does. He stops in his tracks. Just stops in his tracks when he hears this heartfelt cry. And in Mark chapter 10, he runs over to this guy who's just cried out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And he says, "I'm here to restore your sight, son. Get ready." Is that what he says? No, that's not what he says. What are the first words out of this man's mouth? What are the first things that Jesus says to this guy? It's in verse 51. He says, "What do you want me to do for you?" What a question. It seems a little bit like an odd question at first. But again, this is Jesus forcing this man to reflect on what he truly desires. And he's forcing this man to not just reflect on what he truly desires, he's forcing this man to articulate it in his presence. That's what he's doing. Now, you and I, this kind of thing happens to us too, right? This thing happens to us. We are forced to articulate what our desires are. Now, put yourself in Bartimaeus' shoes. That's the guy's name is Bartimaeus. Put yourself in his sandals, all right? How could you possibly answer that question? I mean, if you're there and you've been begging, for as long as you can remember, and you've been blind for as long as you can remember, and this man with authority and power comes to you and says, "What do you want me to do for you?" What are some ways you could answer that question? Well, you could just say, "Hey, Lord, I want some money," right? I mean, he does that every day. He asks people for money every day. He asks people for food every day. He could just say, "Lord, I want some money." It's one way he could answer it. He could answer it, "Lord, I'd love to have a comfortable house. I'm kind of in a spot where I kind of have to find a place to live every day, and I'm in and out of doorways, and I'm in and out of public places. I'd really like to have a comfortable house." He could have said that. He could have said, "You know what? I wish I just never had to beg again. Could you give me that, Lord? Could you answer that prayer? I just wish I'd never have to beg again. Maybe you could give me a family who would take care of me and I'd be cared for and I would never have to beg again." But this guy, he is in touch with the deepest desires of his heart. He knows what he wants. And he says in verse 51, he says, the blind man, Rabbi said, "Rabbi, I want to see. I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. In this story, the question about desire is the pivot point of the story. Every story you read in the Bible, there's usually a pivot point where everything changes. When Jesus asks this man, "What do you want? What do you want me to do for you?" That question about his desires is the pivot point. I want to know, but you and me here, 21st century America, if God came along today and said to you and me, "What do you want me to do for you?" Could we answer that question? And if we could answer that question, would it be the deep desires, or would we just go to something shallow? "I'd like to have a new truck." Would it be something shallow like that? Because that would be a pivot point in our life, wouldn't it? If we could answer that, it would be a real pivot point for us. Here's what Ruth Barton says. She says, "If we let it, such a question strips away the layers of pretense and superficiality to expose what is truest within us." What is truest? You go to the deep desires of your heart, and that tells you who you are. That was one of Augustine's things, right? One of Augustine's things was, you are what you love. He was all about asking people And Augustine, for those of you who go to seminary, I know, you highly educated seminarians, you can't call him Augustine anymore, it's Augustine. So Augustine or Augustine, tomato or tomato, he was all about what are the desires of your heart. That was where he crafted his spirituality from, the deep desires. So you desire to be more in love with God than you are right now. You're longing to love, you're longing to be loved, your desire for deeper levels of transformation, deeper levels of communion and intimacy with God, that is the truest thing about you. It is. Now, desire is the beginning of that journey. When we pay attention to our deep longings, the ones that stir way down deep, underneath all the noise, underneath all the busyness, it is the echo of God's voice in our soul. It is the echo of the imago Dei, the image of God in our soul. I'm going to give you a personal example. And I know I'm taking a big risk by giving you this personal example because I don't want you to go out of here thinking that my personal example should be your personal example, okay? That's something easily done. So I'm going to take a risk. Here's my dilemma. I think if I don't give you a concrete example of what I'm talking about, I don't think you're going to get this. All right? We just don't think this way anymore, right? We just don't. It's not that we're stupid. It's just that we're constantly hearing noise. And so because we're constantly hearing noise, we aren't in touch with the deepest desires of our heart. We just aren't. So I want to give you a concrete example so that you can walk out of here, hopefully, at least with an understanding of what I'm talking about. And I think another risk, if I don't give you a concrete example, this just sounds like preacher talk. You know, this just sounds like one more useless set of preacher talk. Look, folks, this kind of thing can change your life. This really can be a pivot point for us. I was at a men's retreat several years ago. I think it was 2003. Don't quote me on that. Maybe it was 2002. I'm not sure of the exact year, but it was a long time ago. I was at a men's retreat, and this guy asked me, or asked us, those of us in the retreat, he said, "What is it that makes you come alive?" What is it that makes you come alive? Now, most preachers like me would have talked that to death, right? Like I'm doing to you right now. You know, I'm saying, what are the deepest desires of your heart? And then I'm just running my mouth so you can't even think about it, right? He didn't do that. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get up out of your chair. I want you to leave this building. I want you to go outside, and I want you to spend 1 hour in silence trying to get an answer to that question. What is it that makes you come alive? And folks, I'll tell you, if you ever get an opportunity to do that, it ain't easy. It really isn't. I mean, I sat there for about 20 minutes and just stared at trees. You know, I don't know because we're not in touch with this part of us anymore. This stuff has gone to sleep inside of us, many of us anyway. It's just gone to sleep. I was at this point in my life, I was a happy man. I'm not saying I wasn't an unhappy guy, but my heart was pretty much dead. You know, I was trying to do some things to bring my heart back to alive again. I was just kind of going through the motions of life. I wasn't feeling any great joys. I wasn't feeling any great sorrows. I was just kind of middling it. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? No passion, no real excitement, no real joy in my life, just kind of surviving. Not unhappy. I wasn't an unhappy guy, but I was just kind of some experiences in the war. It had to be 2003 because I'd come back from the war. Some experiences in the war had kind of stirred my heart that I needed to get my heart back. And this actually going to this men's retreat was one of the things I did to try to get my heart back. And when this guy said, go outside and ask yourself the question, what is it that makes me? It took me that entire hour to really figure it out. And here's what I wrote in my journal that day, if I can find it. Where is it? I love wilderness. I love streams and mountains. I love forests and oceans. I love hiking trails and swimming holes. That desire to be in nature has been in me as long as I can remember. Even before I became a Christian, it was there. The longing to be in wilderness has grown greater as I've gotten older. Guess who put that desire in me? God put that desire in me. And it's been there for a long time. My earliest memories of having fun and excitement was playing in the creek. Elk Creek, for crying out loud. Elk Creek in the 70s. It was disgusting, but I loved it. There was something in me that just came alive every time I went into Elk Creek. And I know from God, how do I know for sure that this deep desire is from God? Here's how I know for sure. Every time I make plans to go to the wilderness, it gets opposed by Satan like you wouldn't believe. Oh my goodness. You know, we plan a backpack trip with my sons, and schedules get messed up, and people get called out to work, and we the very last time, this was only a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, Joshua and I, we're going to go backpacking 3 days up around Spruce Knob. We go out first night, it's amazing. This huge windstorm howling, blowing. It was amazing. I felt so alive, when I got up the next morning, and then I saw just tons and tons of human beings. Just ruined it. I mean, I've never seen that many human beings around Spruce Knob in my whole life. We couldn't find a place to camp. It does not restore my soul to go to Seneca Creek Trailhead and see 70 cars parked around it. That does not restore my soul. So we left. But here's what I know. Satan opposes this every time I try it. Right? Every time I try to make a step towards wilderness, Satan opposes it. Satan hates to see me walking through the woods. Satan hates to see me paddling down a stream because he knows when I'm paddling down that stream, my heart is alive. And he knows when I'm walking through the woods that my spirit is soaring. He knows that. And he opposes it. Some of the opposition comes from my wife. And I couldn't have picked a better wife out of a catalog. But Sarah hates it when I go out to the wilderness. She hates it. That's a spiritual battle for her. It's her insecurities and her fears. And she's convinced that I'm going to get kidnapped by Sasquatch. And she's convinced that there's going to be an alien abduction. And asteroids are going to strike the mountain. And trees are going to fall over on me. And I'm going to get attacked by a bear. She's just all of these horrible scenarios. And that's the spiritual battle we fight every single time I want to get connected to wilderness. Every single time. I know it's from God because Satan opposes it every single time. He hates to see it. And he knows that if I stay away from wilderness for significant amounts of time, I start looking like an automaton again. I start feeling like a robot again. I start feeling like my heart is dead again. If I don't pay attention to those deep desires of my heart, then what? Again, they go to sleep, I go to resignation and cynicism, or they come out in addictions and rage. They come out sideways. Our hearts become shallow. So, before we talk about any of these habits that we're going to talk about, I felt like I needed to say that. I felt like I needed to say, before we go into the sacred habits that will really keep me connected to Jesus, we also need to look at our deep longings of our heart, the deep desires of our heart. I think we got to do that. I think that's step one. I think that is the soil of my soul, is the deep desires of my heart. Now, the reason I hesitated to tell that story is because that's probably not yours. All right, and I am going to make a case. All right, it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself. I'm going to make a case that every man needs to spend some time in nature. I don't mean you have to become a 3-day backpacker. I don't mean you have to be through hiking the Appalachian Trail. You don't have to be a hunter. You don't have to be a fisherman. You don't have to be this great outdoorsman. But I think that I can make a case that men need to connect to nature. I think ladies probably do too, but I know men more than I know women. And I think, we've got to get connected to nature. C.S. Lewis, he wasn't what you call an outdoorsman. He wasn't a rugged outdoorsman. C.S. Lewis was an academician his entire life, except for the time he spent in the army. And C.S. Lewis said his day wasn't complete if he didn't take a walk through the woods near his house. Just a little stroll through the woods. I think we've got to do that because, when God created Adam, he didn't put him at the mall, right? He didn't set him down in a cubicle. When God created Adam, he put him in what we call the Garden of Eden, but it was a wild place. It was wilderness. It wasn't nice, neat rows of tomatoes and nice, neat rows of corn. It was a wild place. The wild beasts were there. And I think we men have to connect to nature or our soul dies. I think we just die. I think men are dying of boredom. And Christian men, maybe more than the rest of us, Christian men, we're dying of boredom because there's zero adventure in our lives, zero. We just live in cubicles. Anyway, that's my own personal story. I'm going to stop talking now. All right, shut up, Pitts. Move on. Move on, Pitts. Move on. So, those deep personal longings, I think that's the soil that makes our soul energized and the water that makes our soul energized. I think that's these habits we're going to talk about for the next 3 weeks. These sacred habits, cultivating these sacred habits is what brings us into contact with the life-giving energies of Jesus. When I am in nature, when I am in the wilderness, it makes it easy for me to walk with God. It makes it easy for me to be abiding in Christ. When I'm in wilderness, it makes it easy for me to be the kind of man I want to be when I'm in nature. When I'm in nature, my soul becomes restored. But it's not an either or. You know, I know guys, and you've heard guys say this too. Well, the mountains are my church. Trees are my Bible, you know. And they've fallen for that false dichotomy. It's either go to the mountains and be connected to nature, and that's how you get a relationship with God, or you go to church. It's not an either or. Jesus won't permit that, okay? Jesus won't permit that. His habit was to go out in the wilderness and pray to God. Yes, his habit was that, but his habit was also he went to the synagogue every day, every week. Right? It's not an either or. These habits have to be cultivated. The first habit, actually, we talked about for the last 4 weeks is prayer. We talked about that 4 weeks in a row. We talked about prayer. You cannot connect to the life-giving energies of Jesus if you don't pray. It's just not possible. So prayer is one. We're going to talk about 3 more over the next 3 weeks. All right. And I think Jesus said this best in John 15, if you got your Bibles. John 15, very familiar. He said, remain in me and I will remain in you. That's the old King James, abide in me and I will abide in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. Duh. Right? If I cut a branch off of an apple tree, is that branch going to do anything but die? That's all it's going to do, right? If I cut a branch off an apple tree, he's saying the same thing here. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. He's talking about a grapevine rather than an apple tree, but it's the same principle. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I cannot have the life I want to have. I cannot break the habits that I want to break if I don't remain in Jesus, if I'm not connected to him. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear fruit. If I can stay connected to Jesus, guess what? All that fruit that I want in my life, all those things I desire to have in my life, they will come naturally to me. This is Jesus talking. Jesus is telling us how life works. If I really want to produce fruit in my life, if I want to be a more loving person, if I want to be the kind of man that I really want to be, the kind of woman I really want to be, then he says it is possible and it's quite natural for you to do this if you remain in me. You will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he's like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Right? That's what happens to us. If we don't cultivate these habits that keep us connected to Jesus, we simply wither. This is Jesus telling us how life works. It's a reminder that the most effective path to attaining life that I desire is not really about brute effort. It's not really about willpower. It's not really about working something up. It's not really about and there's some love. You know, it's not about sitting, it's not, I got to be a more loving person. I really got to be more, I'm going to read books about how to become a loving person. I'm going to just sit around and talk to myself and psych myself. I've got to become a loving person. I'm going to start chanting it every morning when I get up. I've got to become a more loving person. I've got to become a more loving person. That's willpower, and Jesus isn't talking about willpower here. He's saying, life is in me. Life is in me. You get yourself connected to me, and you'll have love in your heart. It'll be natural, right? It'll be natural. You won't have to work it up. Willpower is way overrated. Way overrated. I love that story that Rick Warren says about this. He says, willpower is so overrated. He said, it's like you're piloting a boat. You got a speedboat going east, and that's east, all right? So you got a speedboat going east, and it's on autopilot, and it's heading east. And you decide, I don't want to go east anymore. I want to crash into a rock. So you start, how are you going to turn that thing around when the autopilot's going east? You can wrestle it around, you can muscle it up, and you can finally get it to turn around to the west. But as soon as your muscles give out, as soon as you get tired, as soon as you get exhausted, as soon as you let go of the wheel and put your attention on something else, what's going to happen to that boat? It's going to spin right around. The autopilot's going to spin it right back around, and it's going to go west again. You can't mess with an autopilot boat. You got to reprogram the autopilot, right? You got to reprogram the autopilot. And what I'm suggesting to you today is that getting in touch with the deepest desires of your heart reprograms the autopilot. And what I'm suggesting to you today is if you get into a relationship with Jesus where he's the vine and you're the branch, and you're in contact and connected with Jesus through these habits that we're going to talk about over the next 3 weeks, you will reprogram your autopilot. It's not about muscling it up with willpower. It's not about, I've got to get this hatred out of my heart. I'm going to just cut away at my heart and try to get that hatred out of my heart. No. That's a futile effort, I think. It's futile. And before we get started too far into this, I just want to say that there's no shortcuts here. We are Americans, and we are swimming in a culture of instant gratification. We are swimming in it. And if you think it's not affecting you, you're kidding yourself. It affects us. And it affects this part of our lives, too. It affects our soul. I can tell you this, that the more I get and buy into the false gospel of now, the false gospel of I got to have it and I got to have it now, the more I buy into that, the more toxic it is to my soul. It's toxic. And you cannot, as a person who's trying to change his life, who wants his life to become different, you're trying to get your roots down, and you're trying to get your roots into the life-giving energies of water and soil, and you're trying to break through the rocks, and you're trying to fight through the spiritual battle that's encompassing that. If you feel like if it doesn't happen now, it's not effective. See, that's where we go sideways. That's where we lose it. We lose it because we think, well, okay, I tried it once. Must not work. Or, I can see some of you, maybe one of you, nobody pays attention to what I say, but maybe one of you come out of here and say, maybe I should ask myself that question. What is it that makes me come alive? That sounds like a good question. So, you go into your truck and you're getting ready to go to work tomorrow, and you turn on the radio and the radio's blaring, and, you've got 5 minutes to get to work, and you've got to stop and get your Burger King sausage, egg, and biscuit, thing. And you're doing all that trying to answer this question about what makes you come alive. And you say, well, it doesn't work. No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. A.W. Tozer, everybody loves A.W. Tozer, right? He said in The Pursuit of Man, he says, in my creature impatience, I am often caused to wish that there were some way to bring modern Christians into a deeper spiritual life painlessly by short, easy lessons. But such wishes are vain. No shortcut exists. God has not bowed to our nervous haste, nor embraced the methods of our age. It is well that we should accept this hard truth right now. The man who would know God must give time to him. The man who would know God must give time to him. The man who would know God must give time to him. He must count no time wasted, which he spent in the cultivation of this acquaintance. If you have a core belief that there are shortcuts, that there are hacks, that there's ways around things, and you crave that, it will cripple this process in your life. It'll cripple it. And you'll be right back at the same place a year from now if you think there's a shortcut. Morgan Snyder said, I am slowly becoming the kind of man who no longer desires shortcuts. I want life. I want wholeheartedness. And that's what we're trying to get you in touch with over the next 3 weeks. We're not legalists in this church. In fact, I kind of hate legalism. I was a legalist for a while, and I kind of hate it. That's where you got to do certain things in order to earn God's love. God doesn't love me any less if I don't practice these spiritual habits that we're going to talk about. He's not going to love me less if I don't, and he's not going to love me more if I do. But, and this is a big but if I stay and connected with him, if I stay connected to him through these habits, if they are what puts me in contact with the life-giving energy of Jesus, that's what I'm about, man. That's what I hope you're about. I want to be, there's a certain man I want to be. And the only way I can be that kind of man is to get in touch with the deep desires of my heart and get in touch with how do I stay connected to Jesus. All right. Come back, all right? Come back for the next 3 weeks. We'll see you. If you're new, I want to see you right over here for a few minutes.